maybe let's move on to the next session between need and greed. Again, we have two presentations. So, Ajay, if you could start.
Yeah. So the 3 meter trap is a story of a third dimension of space, that is the height. This presentation talks about the building that have tried to break away from the standard height and have achieved certain spatial experience through volumetric variation. And the second part of the presentation tries to search why such buildings aren't built often, or why don't we have more Kanchenjungas. Um, So as we can see in this picture, most of the apartment built in India at the present has constant 3 meter height, which has become so rigid and embedded in practice that it has stopped exploring the volumetric variation in vertical living, which results in a monotony at various levels. Does it feel like an apartment here? Or doesn't this space look like a veranda of a bungalow on the ground? The common thing about all these spaces is that they all belong to an apartment and it still manages to have certain spatial experience that a bungalow gives because of its larger volume. Now, given that the volumetric exploration in apartment unit can enhance the spatial experience, the larger question here is how to break away from the trap of 3 meter. Can this situation be changed? Is it possible to spread unit vertically? And hence this presentation tries to understand the spatial benefit and practical challenges in making such buildings. These are the major three typologies that emerges out of the volumetric variation. We all briefly see, we all will briefly see what is interesting about this typology through these three examples, these three buildings, which are built in different contexts. The first interesting thing about it is the way the change in volume within the unit allows a variety of units to get interlocked. Or if we see at a block level, how these buildings have achieved certain height efficiency due to interlocking, or where each unit tries to remove the impression of standardization. Second thing is the way such unit allows a wide range of openings on the facade that breaks up the building mass and provide a greater visual interest. The third is a spatial benefit. One of them is privacy, which is the major problem in the apartment nowadays. Now with this typology where entire unit is divided on two levels, these problems is solved. I came to know from the developer that they also are trying to resolve the issue of the privacy, but it is too difficult when the unit is on the same level. Uh, Developer thinks that these kind of units are suitable for the growing family who have their kids, or the family who has two generations living, where the upper floor can be for a married couple and the living room and the dining space can be more public. The second thing is the way such units allows a wide range of opening on the facade and the way it connects with the outside. These heightened opening with the terrace garden reduces the perception of high-rise living. And the last is the way spaces are defined with the change in ceiling height. The high ceiling for a public space like living room and low ceiling for an intimate space like bedroom. Now, since we know the benefit of it, on the second part, I've tried to understand a developer's perspective that why don't we have this type of building block? What are the challenges? So these are the major categories of challenges that emerge through informal talks with developers, out of which the first is psychological challenges. The developer's mindset of repeating success and avoid a risk situation having as much as standardization possible. There is no as such, what they think is there is no as such demand on people or people don't pay premium rates for such things. Or they think that in affordable apartment, it is not possible to have a sectional plate. The second is developers' perspective on buyers' mindset, where they feel that height is not the quality people by and large see. People want to see a bigger living room when they enter the house. Or the other thing is that people do feel the spatial benefits of such apartments, but they might not be able to verbalize it. And then that stop it from being a market trend. So the question here is, how much as a designer can we change this larger perception of the people and convince the developer for such projects? The developer's perspective on a regulatory limitation is that they can't give a double height unit or different height unit than usual, because then the overall number of units produced will be less. Giving additional height of 1 feet on each level would, for a 10-story building, would cost us a loss of entire floor. But then I quite disagree with that, because then those type of complexity can be resolved by interlocking, where you can see in this diagram where the spaces which need 2.1 meter height can be, the way the interlocking is achieved in this section, where the living or space has a higher volume and the space like bedroom or toilet has lower volume. The diagram below shows that how unit is divided on 3 levels, though it doesn't have a volumetric exploration, but though it has the quality of the volume on 2 levels, because the unit is spread strategically on 3 levels. These This is the in between which I was trying to think, where the entire, as you can see in the plan here, where the entire service is bunched together, where bathroom, kitchen, entrance is together, where they need 2.1 meter height, and by adding extra 1 meter on top of it, so it becomes from 3 to 4 meter, a mezzanine level could be achieved on top of it. The other regulatory limitation is that the mezzanine can't be more than 30% of the enclosure. So can these 30% at least be 50%, so that 2 rooms of appropriate size can be placed on the mezzanine level? Or can this percentage vary based on the area of the unit? So larger the area, the more percentage of mezzanine is allowed. The other is construction complex. What developers thinks about this construction challenges is that the support system has to be changed. Different setup required for the plaster and paint for double height is different. And due to intermediate level, the construction cycle becomes slower if not planned wisely. Because after casting split levels, they need to wait. So here I was thinking that what if we standardize a 5 meter or a 6 meter height, like we have done for 3 meter, and we can have a building like this, where the intermediate or the split level can be made later on, which is initially counted in FSI, but can be added later on with the steel beam, or can be a part of interior based on the people choice. People keep adding it afterwards. The developer's perspective on a cost is that since the process is not standardized, the cost increases. And the other important thing here is that even if the developer has enough FSI or a bigger site where they can do this volumetric play and get enough number of units, developer doesn't want to build multiple number of blocks, because then making each block will add up to each new set of cost, within which major is the foundation cost. So maybe we can think of a block layout where a block is longer, like in the Habitat building by Corbusier, or a different sort of block layout where we don't have to build multiple buildings, but these things can be done in a single building. Other is the cost of the extra staircase within the unit, or the area that staircase occupies, it becomes non-habitable. The space efficiency, as we talked about the staircase, uh, and then yeah, the unused double height. But then we still have a solution of those kinds which are not explored in India a lot, which are like we can have a compact lightweight staircase or organized storage space under the staircase. So these issues can be resolved. And the last is the entire notion of making height a luxurious thing, where it is just given or explored in that apartment that crosses a certain budget limit. So what developer has started exploring is that the project that crossed certain height limit of like in Gujarat context, if we see the flat which crosses 1 crore has started exploring certain height. And one important thing which I came to know was that in 1990s, what used to happen was there was a need for storage above. So there was a lintel and they had 2.5 storage above storage in the each room. So the heights of the room used to be 10 to 12 feet. But with the time, these entire lintel level has been eliminated since buyers are not demanding such things. And hence, the question is also that does the quality of living is directly proportional to the amount of money spent, or the larger question here is why the increase in height is always demanding the multiple of 3. Either it's 3 meter or double height. What is the in between for the height that is yet to be explored for the modern apartments in India? Can it be 4.5 meter? Can it be 4 meter? Yeah.
Thank you, Ajay. May I now request Ashumi to present?
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So I had initially started out by trying to understand the ideas of dignity and quality of life in the realm of housing, and invariably landed on rehabilitation housing, especially SRA housing in Mumbai. So I'll be tracing the journey of a certain building, the Omkar Altamonte. This building was rather interesting to me because it was one of the first projects that looked differently at the process of slum rehabilitation housing when it was proposed. Furthermore, it uses the subsidy model and an incredibly huge amount of FSR. There are a number of acts and larger decisions which have led to the eventual built form of our cities, and by extension, this building. Some of these are the Slum Clearance Act, which was established in the post independence period of India, which provides for the improvement and redevelopment of these areas. Then FSI was introduced in Mumbai as a way to control the density of tenants. In 1994, the development plan for Mumbai was adopted. This included plans for multiple roadways and highways. The SRA was an official agency created to lead slum redevelopment in Mumbai. Along the way, as governments changed, the cutoff date for rehabilitation of the residents of slums kept changing, adding to how many people needed to be housed. There was a range of events that also shaped this particular project over time. With Mumbai's local trains hitting almost a bursting point, the metro seemed like a messiah saving the city. The Metro Line 7 was proposed on the Western Expressway, extremely close to the site, which sort of drastically increased the value of this project and also the FSI allocated to it. During the construction phase, there was also a fire that broke out. And this fire is notable because it was one of the longest firefighting operations in the city. And this happened because the building was so high and the city's firefighting department still didn't have appropriate equipment to deal with it. Then the BJP and Shiv Sena government, just before the polls, largely increased the number of people needed to be rehabilitated by declaring that everyone living in slums in Mumbai were eligible for rehabilitation. Another fascinating step in the journey of this building is that the conglomerate Piramal raised a rupees 500 crore apartment fund in 2014 in order to buy apartments from developers at significant discounts to market rates. Its first investment was this project Altamonte. Financially backed, this allowed Omkar to do what few others had done before them, which was promise the residing residents of the slums that their homes would be built before the saleable component. This allowed them to convince the slum dwellers with greater ease and get their permission much faster. With this in place, the construction of the SRA as well as the saleable residential components were built at breakneck speed. Apart from this, there were a number of regulations which allowed this building to reach the massive 13.4 FSI that it has. So within building requirements, there was the addition of the podium, which was made as the number of cars in the city started to increase and the buildings grew taller and wider. Podiums can go up to 32 meters tall, which is around 10 to 11 floors, and have altered the relationship between buildings, roads, and people dramatically. Um, the second thing, so the first way that a project can gain additional FSI is that if it can accommodate a minimum of 50 cars as public parking. Altamonte, with its 7-story podium for parking, can do that and much more. The second thing that was that the TDR essentially frees the development potential of the land from the land itself. This usually happens when the use of personal land is reserved for another purpose in the development plan of the city. This is done so that the government doesn't have to give heavy monetary compensations. The TDR is also given when the owner of a particular parcel of land makes free of charge housing for slum rehabilitation, with the idea that this incentive will attract more builders. This regulation plays a large part in the creation of the concrete jungle, so to speak, that we experience in Mumbai, as it capitalizes on the greed of the developer at the expense of those living in the bastis. Furthermore, there is additional FSI available for the rehabilitation of the people living in the slums. This again, it makes it very lucrative for the developer to get into these kind of projects. Additionally, multiple regulations from the DCR ensure that um, the inhabitants living in these spaces are at least living in bare, decent minimum spaces. However, these regulations are even further relaxed in slum rehabilitation homes. The maximum density that the density of dwelling units per hectare that the DCR allows is 500, whereas for slum rehabilitation schemes, the minimum required is 500 to 600, and the maximum is not even prescribed. Other regulations which are relaxed include the distance of margins, open spaces, and the distance between two buildings. For a comparison to the general DCR, this is the regulation. It becomes pertinent to ask, therefore, that if the most basic quality of life for people is generally followed according to the DCR, why is it that because a certain group of people simply have higher densities on a parcel of land, the most basic quality of life for them is also compromised? Following this line of thought, it is interesting to note that the Omkar realtors seem to be outstanding in their field of expertise. They had entered this market of slum rehabilitation, and soon this became their specialty. They recognized what the main problems in the market were and why most redevelopment projects failed. Primarily because no developer delivered what they had promised, and definitely not within the stipulated time. This was a great cause of concern to the slum residents, who rarely gave permission for the go ahead of projects. This led to a lot of heavy handling and forced evictions, which sort of added on to the negative image of the developers. What Omkar focused on was on creating a credible name for themselves by first and foremost delivering their projects on time and having high standards of quality in their construction, for which they hired the same contractors to do both the SRE component and the saleable component. This attracted a lot of positive attention to them. And for the people being resettled in SRA housing, allowed for a certain kind of psychological assurance that their homes will at least be of high quality, and more importantly, maybe equal quality, even if their square footage is much lesser. Omkar asserts that unlike others, no muscle power is used in the procedure, calling it the Gandhian way of doing things. I think we can take this with a little pinch of salt because I read this on a website which was meant for developers. But they say that they create teams of relationship managers who are trained to approach slum dwellers and convince them about the benefits of redevelopment. One manager reaches out to only 4 or 5 tenements, educating them about the program and even helping out with things like children's admissions or medical aid. The company says that they even go a step further and helping tenants to acclimatize to their new lifestyle by giving training programs for elevators, fire systems, saving water, or disposing garbage. In comparison to many SRA projects across Mumbai, this is undoubtedly one of the better ones, with some semblance of light reaching the lower units and basic margins between buildings. These developers already do more than most, yet their efforts fall short in the eventual build projects in terms of the quality of life it affords to its inhabitants and the relationships and hierarchies that it creates. This really makes me wonder, is this the best that we can do? The cycle of the story of this building has sort of ended here for now, but it opens up a realm of so many different stories, questions, and possibilities which are scattered across our cities. And the most important one for me being questions of dignity, of how even in the least amount of resources can developer driven housing models provide for the same basic quality of life that those with greater resources have access to, and what kind of strategies are there for the architect to intervene in this process. Apart from actively lobbying to make policy level changes, how is it that we can help to create better, more humane conditions for the people living in these buildings within the framework of policies that are in place? Thank you.
Thank you, Ashumi and Ajay. Well, so again, we seem to have shifted gear into looking at uh, housing from a very different perspective. Both, I think, one thing that ties both the presentations together is that they start actively engaging with the questions of developers and pressures that developers face. Uh, and their viewpoints on housing and how that uh, inherently sort of skews the kind of quality of spaces that we find in housing. And at the same time, I think both presentations also touched upon the role of regulations and how it starts skewing the quality of housing that we get. So I think it would be interesting to discuss these two perspectives: the developer perspective, that is profitability, as well as the regulatory perspective. Uh, Now that was the common thing. Individually, of course, the two presentations also bring out two very different aspects of housing design. Uh, I mean, the photographs that Ajay showed of, I think, Kanchenjunga and Center Point and Unite are very, I mean, just the photographs, like Ajay, you were saying, on first hand, they don't appear to be apartments. And it is, I find it strange that the idea that the apartment has to be a single story house as opposed to a bungalow which can be a two-story house is somehow so ingrained uh, in the minds of people who are producing housing. And there actually, if we go into detail, I find Center Point interesting in that it is a split level duplex. So because from a user perspective, one of the issues people raise with a duplex is that you have to climb that one entire flight of staircase to reach other spaces in the house, which is primarily your bedrooms in most cases. uh, the very fact that in Center Point you have these split levels, so you just climb a few steps and you're onto one bedroom. You climb a few more steps, you're in another bedroom. And the way the entire interlocking has been done and is very fascinating. And on the other hand, even Kanchenjunga, where it also plays with level differences which are not one floor high but few steps down and few steps up, uh, uh, which is also very fascinating. And I think you raise a very pertinent point when you're asking why is it that more people are not exploring this idea of getting out of what you call the 3 by 3 meter trap. I think like you're rightly saying, on one hand, the 3 by 3 of the bedroom, the length and the width is also a trap, but I think this 3 meter height seems to be a much bigger trap that all of us have fallen into. Um, and so, did you come across any other apartment schemes? I mean, we know Kanchenjunga and Unite, but in Ahmedabad or in any other cities, did you come across any other duplexes or split levels?
Yeah. So in my city, there's one duplex, one triplex, which is being constructed right now, and it is almost going to be finished. But not a single. I tried contacting the people who are engaged in it, and I came to know that not a single flat has been sold because it is too costly. The apartments are of starting from 8 crores. So it is too costly that people can buy a bungalow in Surat rather than buying a duplex because
Right.
we don't have a land problem like Mumbai. So people would rather prefer buying a bungalow than buying such uh, costly
Hmm.
apartment.
I think that other correlation that you had made, saying that where developers were saying that it makes sense to do a duplex only when the flat is above a certain cost. Uh, and there I would actually tie it up with a regulatory issue as well, that in regulation your common staircases are free of FSI, but in in staircases inside houses are not free of FSI. So in a 70 square, say I'm doing a smaller apartment which is only 70 square meters. Uh, if I do a staircase, then I'm losing out on that much area, and that is not only losing out on the area of the apartment, even though I have to price that apartment according to a 70 square meter area, but I'm also losing out on FSI, which also sort of increases the problem of having a duple. But like you're saying, interestingly, I mean, technologically, I mean, that folding staircase that you showed, uh, I wonder how that would pan out from a municipal corporation drawing, passing drawing perspective, you know, because uh, unfortunately, flexible staircase or a staircase which can be folded away doesn't find mention at all. Uh, I wonder whether you can pass the plan where you don't show a staircase at all, and that there are just uh, uh, rooms on the upper floor. Uh, could be fascinating. Yeah. But yeah, I think that uh, it is worth looking at it from all angles. The other angle you talked about is that why only 3 meters or 6 meters? Why not 4 meters, for example? And there again, I think, like we have been discussing, it is the interrelationship between the maximum building height permissible and the FSI permissible, whether it allows you extra height to play with. But then, like you're mentioning, even a interlocking section might allow you to get extra height. Uh, uh, so Sanket on chat is talking of another example, Kanyakumari Heights. Uh, So, Sanket, since you're working on it, maybe you could just describe a little bit of it. As in, is it a duplex kind of thing with an internal staircase, or just a plain heights?
Hello.
Hi, Sanket. How are you?
Hi. I'm good.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine. I'm
Yeah.
fine. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is one project of my firm. It is located in Kandivali part of Mumbai, the northern suburbs, western suburbs precisely. And over here, it's a kind of an apartment tower consisting of two typologies. One of which is a 4-bedroom apartment, which is kind of a duplex, and the other one is a 3-bedroom apartment placed on the other side of it. So I don't have the drawings with me as I'm right now not in the city. But over here, we try to have them. Try to explore the social spaces like living and dining spaces, and try to let them go beyond 3 meters. Like some of them go 4.2 meters, some of them go 4.5 meters. And the individual bedrooms are also kind of placed on levels. So two sets of them come on 1.5 meter, another set comes on 3 meter. And here we also not try to take this volume for double height, which would have been a normal approach, so that on the top of each of the duplex you get a kind of a level for the next duplex also to come. So it's the section is kind of a zigzag profile in which we have tried to interlock one apartment over the other. So that section is also quite interesting. It was also done considering so that the volume does not overshoot too much. The living space, which is normally over here, the width of it is 3.5 meter. It goes 6 meter height. Then it may become suddenly too much overwhelming. So we retain it at 4.5 meter, considering the proportions of that space. And also it reduces certain cost. If you would have taken it 6 meter high, there would have been more cost associated with it. So we retained it at 4.5 meter, and that offered a unique possibility of resolving that sections. So it works out like that. Only thing is that when it was proposed, it was actually initiated in 2010, but because of some concerns by BMC and then the budget of the builder, it got several delays. But and then there are still, I think, one or two flats which are yet not unsold because the space, the carpet area is too large. It has kind of become even like unaffordable for the regular residents in that area. So that is also something that would bother to builder, like कि जितना पैसा इन्वेस्ट किया है उतना वो enough quickly वापस नहीं आ रहा है. But despite of that, when the first flat was made, the mock-up interiors were made to that flat in order to give the buyer a perspective how would they could adapt to a certain spaces. Like instead of occupying all 4 bedrooms, maybe they could convert 1 bedroom in a kind of a family room or a kind of a different kind of spaces. So there was more adaptive aspect also related to this arrangement of spaces, which fascinated many of the buyers. So most of them who could not afford the 4 BHK apartment because they were very fascinated by this, they purchased the 3 BHK apartment. So even these spaces are somewhat trying to inspire the users, people who want to stay there. Only these things of cost and how to also not go into loss. If that is something that can be achieved in a better manner. Also, in case of what could be the contingencies because of some delays by some other aspects. Like for example, 2 years back there was a major fire in one of the mill land, which is now being used for many recreational activities. Kamla Mills, if you may know. And that triggered a very, very huge impact on the rest of the city. So over here, since this apartment had too many levels, the fire department then became active and then said, no, you need to have fire exits on all the levels. So it was actually a very, very, very huge trouble that we had to go through and accommodate all the escape routes for the higher levels. But eventually that was managed. There was not much manipulations that externally we had to do, only a few. But the building isn't ready. Only thing is that earlier we did not have permission to put it online, but now we are working on it. So by I think the end of the year, we will have some data not only for the builder sake, but also for the students and other academicians to study. Yeah, I think this was getting developed when we had met during that previous state of housing exhibition.
Yeah.
So that's just
great. No, that's great.
But
Sorry, go ahead.
No, some of the examples that students have shared today, they are very good. Like right from the first about the affordability. So I unfortunately my students have a separate review, so they could not attend. So if you can also maybe share a YouTube link, I would like them to. That is possible.
No, definitely. We are recording it and we'll put it up on YouTube. So we will be sharing the YouTube link as well. Yeah. So what I also find fascinating about this duplex, if designed well, is that the idea that the house folds onto itself. That you can, I mean, again, if I take the example of Center Point, just because I have been in those apartments, that from the main living room you take half a flight of staircase, and the first bedroom is on the split level. So a very large bedroom window opens out onto the living room, but because it is 1.5 meters high, there are no privacy issues. In fact, many people have even removed the developer had originally given a window which you could close. many people have removed that window also, because from the living room you can just see the ceiling of the bedroom. But the
Yeah.
whole idea that from a bedroom, or some people are using it as a TV room or family space, the whole idea that from your own house you can look into your own house
Yeah.
is something that a flat never provides as an experience. You always look out
Yes.
outside.
Yes.
And so even from an experiential perspective, the idea of a house holding on to itself and looking out into your own house, I find that is a very interesting experience, that this double height makes it possible. Why I say this is that I came across uh, one example of a duplex where it's a duplex, uh, but the upper level room does not look out onto the lower level room. It's just a house on two floors. I mean, a lot of us have seen small bungalows or even big bungalows which are on two floors, but the two floors are completely visually disconnected. Only a staircase sort of binds them together. Experientially, they are very different from houses where from the top floor you can look down onto the lower floor. You know, and simple things like someone is in the kitchen and they will shout out कि खाना तैयार है नीचे आ जाओ, which doesn't happen if there is
Yeah.
no double height or a window which
Yeah.
overlooks. So it's fascinating to look at that. Uh,
Yeah, so there was this concerns also, this aspect also which got developed because of this interesting section I told you about, in which all the levels they had somewhere some of the other space to overlook upon, as you were saying. Even the top bedroom, there was a gap between the beam of the living room and the floor of that bedroom, which eventually, by intervention of an interior designer, he made that gap open so that if suppose children's occupy that room, kids occupy that room, the mother or father may just give a shout out and ask them to come down. So it kind of explored many possibilities, but these explorations somewhat get hidden in the normal way in which I think the real estate is developing these apartments. There are many opportunities which have not yet been explored.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's true. Uh,
yeah,
So, moving on to the second presentation, which where Ashumi was talking about the SRA project, Omkar Altamonte. One, I was, I mean, so it has 13.4 FSI and 6 stories of parking. So I think one interesting aspect I found was this whole question of how this multi-level parking on the lower levels is completely changing the notion of the city. Uh, I think it has already started in Bombay that all these new high-rise developments, housing developments, they end up having anywhere between 3 stories to 6 stories of parking, uh, um, and uh, they are these standardized parking structures, and suddenly that means you're shifting the ground of the city to probably the sixth floor or third floor of the city. And already the elevated expressways and elevated metro lines are doing it. They are sort of
okay.
changing, yeah, changing what is the ground. Uh, and I think this parking is just going to sort of increase that. Um, but the other question of the dignity of life, and it's interesting that you brought out all the points of the regulations and the DCR which allow slightly lesser standards when you're doing SRA projects. The assumption, uh, uh, the assumption being that because it is for low income and because it's slum redevelopment, you can relax certain regulations and thereby build more houses on the same plot of land. So you are leveraging that land more and more, and I think the question then is how far do you go, right? Uh, and how do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? Uh, so are you saying that there should be no difference between SRA set of regulations and market driven housing regulations, or are you saying that the the line that they have drawn is too far, uh, or compromising quality of space too far? How would you look at it?
But then I feel like there should be no difference because anyways in
Right.
the DCR what is there, you're talking about the minimum amount of spaces. You're not talking about the extra anyways. And if within the minimum we are further compromising, I mean,
Mm.
then who do we consider to be the general people? And I think there's lots of issues about equality and things like that. Yeah.
No, yeah, from that perspective, you're right that the regulations are spelling out minimum standards, and the assumption, therefore, is that these are the minimum standards. Mm. But what if it makes the housing too expensive because because of the interrelationship between land cost and how much you can build, what margins you can keep, etc., etc. If it becomes too expensive, then what do you do with it?
I think a lot of um, a lot of the budget for these projects anyways comes from sort of the cross subsidy model. And you I don't know, I
Mm.
feel like you can, like, even in this particular project, if you see the sort of discrepancy which is there between the two, um,
Mm.
I think also when you put in a policy level change, maybe the entire market is sort of forced to think a little differently, and that you do have to put in that little extra amount, even if it comes at a loss. Because uh, I think the question of why certain groups of people deserve lesser than the minimum is a huge issue. And if it's in the regulation, then obviously people are going to go with that they're doing it legally. But if the
Mm.
regulation itself changes and sort of lifts the bar entirely, I think the market will eventually adapt to it.
Yeah, I think in the case of cities like Bombay, it becomes extreme, probably also because of the land value, right? I mean, it's so expensive that every square meter counts a lot, and one can really see the squeeze. And I think, like you're saying, probably this project that you're showing, I'm not aware much of Bombay, but this project that you're showing seems to be slightly better off than some of the other SRA projects that at least I've seen visuals of, where uh, uh, like you put it, the quality of life has really taken a beating. Uh, so it the but I think that is where it would be important to, I mean, get politics into it as well, uh, and trying to tie it back to the idea of the oikopolis, that how politics plays a role in uh, uh, trying to reduce the bar so that you can accommodate more and more people in that same plot, uh, because and because then you get more and more votes, right? So uh, it's and interestingly, like you brought the political angle to it also, that every successive regime for political gains is, I mean, this entire cutoff date is a whole political game in itself, right? When it comes to redevelopment projects, not only in Bombay but everywhere, even in Ahmedabad, there's a huge hue and cry on what is that cutoff date, and it starts getting buffeted every time a government changes. But I think this tying regulations and politics together would also be important in order to understand why some of these uh, things are happening. But yeah, like I said, uh, I see on the list of participants that there are other Bombay experts sitting in the group. Maybe they have something to add.
Just can I just quickly add? I just joined. Vishwanath, sorry, Shriyank
Yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
So, I mean, I missed the presentation a bit, but I just joined the discussion. I heard
Right.
the Altamonte's, the
Yes.
description that you just gave. So this is study also we're doing at Sameep's office with this relationship between building regulations and housing form. And Altamonte is an interesting case in that sense, you know? And not only G plus, not only 3 or 6 floors, but there are cases where there are 10 floors of parking, 11 floors of parking actually, because the regulation allows, at one point at least allowed for that to happen. And there are interesting cases where the parking tower is thinner and taller, and there are 7 or 8 floors of apartments on top of a 10-floor podium. It's a very funny thing, the ways in which these regulations are manifested. In case of Altamonte, you're right. I mean, it's more generous than most SRA schemes. At least the distance between buildings is considerable, and so on and so forth. But I think one of the things that it missed out in these new developments is that typically the question of density is discussed on a let's say an urban block level, right? You can take a larger block and say you can discuss densities like that. What these projects are doing is that it is flipping the question of density on its head, and not many people are kind of arguing for this. Is to is that with high FSI they're also making it high density. Typically, so far the FSI myth was busted, saying that high FSI does not mean high density. But with SRA schemes kind of getting condensed into 50% of the site or lesser, plus a sales component on the same side, is actually kind of making the FSI thing becoming again a question of density. So that's another interesting I think aspect to explore. And one more thing that I wanted to say that regulations keep on changing in Bombay at least every 2 to 3 days. Honestly, like some of the minor regulations keep on changing, and the licensing architects get WhatsApp updates from the people in DMC saying this regulation is changed and that is changed. But I think what becomes important for me, at least as architects, is to look at interpretation of those bylaws, because bylaws is always saying minimum and maximum. It is never saying provide only this or only that. It's the game of minimum and maximum. In that sense, it becomes interesting to look at all the questions of form, space, density, light, ventilation, through those interpretation of these regulations, rather than saying that this is a norm, hence it has to be followed through the last T. So I think those things would also be interesting to think about.
Yeah, in fact, in Ahmedabad now with the 132 feet ring road and the metro corridor, because of transit-oriented development, they have increased the FSI. And of course, like you're saying, the planners have their own logic of how to talk about densities. Um, what what they don't take into account is I mean, at least in the case of TOD, what it doesn't take into account that transportation is only one aspect of infrastructure that you need to think about when you are increasing densities. So interestingly, in many parts of Ahmedabad, um, because the corridor runs through old housing neighborhoods, the density, the actual built density is 0.8, and after TOD now it becomes 4. So you're actually putting in almost you're increasing it 5 times. Your water supply, your sewerage, uh, uh, and what and curiously what happens is that this TOD corridors they attract they actually don't attract income housing that is dealing with or which will cater to people who will actually take that public transport.
That's true.
Because
That's true.
because of that corridor, it starts attracting high-end housing, and those people never take that transportation, and so you also end up getting traffic jam next to this uh, 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 TODs, which is so this whole sort of, I think, nexus between regulations, the politics that affect the regulations, and the impact it has on people living in the city. Uh, I, I I don't know about SEA, but in at SEP we have not been talking about it enough, and also not talking about as architects how do we deal with it, how do we make sense of it,
Yeah.
knowing fully well that we are not policy makers. I mean, some of the students might want to get into that, but what is how do we architecturally what is the architectural manifestation or ramification of
Yeah.
these issues?
Absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah, I think the first point that you made about how it is changing the relationship with the city,
hmm,
with the coming in of a podium,
hmm,
and I think that's a very important aspect also for architects to really pay attention. I mean, podium need not be only one way of kind of addressing
yeah.
the section of the podium also becomes an interesting place where an architect can intervene and do multiple things. How does it relate to
Hmm,
the city? So I think you're absolutely right in that sense that architects need to pay attention to the what form will it actually kind of provide to the city and
hmm,
offer to the city.
hmm. Yeah, maybe there are two sort of different uh, areas of engagement. One would be as architects from a building level or design perspective, critiquing the bylaws and regulations,
Yeah.
uh, which should happen parallelly with, on the other hand, asking, okay, if this is reality now, what is the best way that we can engage with it? That if there is a
Yeah.
sixth floor podium, and as architects, if we are realizing that the city is the image of the city, the character of the city is inherently changing because of that, as architects, what can we do to that podium? Rather than just thinking of it as infrastructure, because whatever little these buildings that you see in Bombay, the ones that you're mentioning, you go on these flyovers, the Western Express, and you see all these
Yeah.
six-story. They, I think that part of the building is looked as infrastructure. So it has the language of bridges. It doesn't
Hmm.
have the language of city. It
Right.
doesn't have the language of small shops and homes. The architectural language of that parking is analogous to bridges,
Yeah.
which I think is squarely in the domain of the architects to question.
Absolutely.
How do we scale down this monstrosity? I mean,
Yeah.
even if it has to exist, how do we scale it
Yeah.
uh, uh, to a more humane sort of environment? Uh, Actually, in Ahmedabad, it takes. I mean, this pressure. Uh, we still don't have that six-story parking kind of pressure because um, of land and other issues. But this podium level shops, the two floors of shops, and then housing on top. Uh, I think that is another typology which, at least in the case of Ahmedabad, is very prevalent. So you have all these busy roads, and because of the size of the plot, you are allowed two floors of commercial. So obviously, every apartment complex has two floors of commercial, uh, purely because regulations allow that much. And then the third floor, which sits right on top of that G+1 commercial, has their bedroom windows, living room windows directly opening out onto that main road. Okay? And if I look at the quality of life for that person whose bedroom window is opening out and you look down onto a shop, sometimes it's a pawn shop, sometimes it's a Reliance Smart, whatever that might be, and it's a completely strange phenomena. What I find even more ridiculous is because those apartments are on the main road, they are expensive. because from a real estate perspective, they are expensive property. But what Ashwini was talking from a quality of life perspective, I think they should be the cheapest apartments. Who wants to live on the main road of the city, Uh, but this this interplay is something that as architects we are not engaging. And in fact, going back to the previous session, which was talking about windows and sharing, I wonder how as an architect will we design a window which is overlooking a busy main road from a second floor as different from a window which is looking on into the common open plot which is at the back maybe. This is squarely an architect's, a question in the architect's domain, which we should be asking. Hmm. Okay. Are there any other, would anyone like to add anything or ask maybe?
Kashi, sir, Bhavya here.
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Actually, I did attend the entire session, and I really like the pressing issues of an apartment scheme which were raised. I myself have been living in apartment schemes since 20 years now. So uh, I do realize all these concerns. I myself do face them, and after joining the field, I realized that there is a huge gap in making my parents understand that no, the idea of having a larger living room is not the only thing you need in an apartment. You might also need some private spaces. There is a lot of gap in this understanding. And the other thing about the the dining room, which you said is like a fluid space, the idea of private lifts, and the windows being flexible, and who owns the ground, and the generative affordances. We have these several questions raised in this session, and I guess that is also a motive of the studio. But what do we do about it? I mean, I know there is no black and white answer to these questions, but these are solely encouraged for students to think in this direction, so they when they practice they think about these things, or they know at least these things. So at this stage, I only, like, whenever I talk with Heer or Ajay or anyone from the studio, I only ask this thing, like, what do we do about this? how,
Yeah.
how are we going forward with this whole issue?
Yeah. I think like you yourself are saying there, maybe there is no single way of going about it. There is no single answer. Like what you said right in the beginning, that I'm sure all of us face that. When you're saying that you yourself might find it difficult to convince your parents about what is normative, what is considered desirable versus what you think now as an architect you should be thinking of. So one strand uh, uh, is about how architects engage with society at large, uh, uh, and I think that is something that most architects don't, right? Apart from doing projects, how do architects converse with people from society, and where where is that platform for engagement? Because there is also a huge scope for some sort of social responsibility. So sometimes I wonder, just like it's mandated that companies have this CSR, uh, uh, where they have to give 2% of their profits towards social responsibility. Uh, I know we can't do that with architects. Of whatever I hear from my friends, they can barely make ends meet. Uh, but sometimes I wonder, what if that CSR is converted into time instead of money? That every month you have to give, say, 1 day a month to engage with society at large and try to talk about, uh, try to have a dialogue with society. Okay, not within your own fraternity or extended fraternity, so not with artists and civil engineers and that, but society at large. Because on one hand, in our first session, we talked of flexibility and adaptability, where we put lot of uh, uh, um, uh, importance on what people want, or giving power to people to decide what they want. But on the other hand, we are also talking of us ourselves as professionals, and therefore somewhere being able to make better indirect connections between space and what it does to people. People are, I think people are very good at making immediate connections between space and what it does to people. So if the kitchen platform height is wrong, or if rain comes from a window, I think people are better at sort of giving us feedback on that. But if I have to talk of indirect sort of relationships between architecture and behavior, probably people are not aware of that. So anyway, so that is one thought that comes to my mind. The second, purely from an education perspective, is that I mean we already have this system of so many studios and options to choose from. That why is it that the default when we talk about architecture is architecture with a capital A? It is about the modern masters, and that is how we look at architecture, which is about form, scale, proportion, tectonics, material, texture, and so on. And whatever little city level studios we have uh, are all about the architect maybe as an activist, where you are proposing innovative solutions or creative solutions to urban problems. Uh, yes, such studios should also exist, but what about the rest of the bulk of architecture, mainstream building? Architects will not even call it architecture. What about the rest of mainstream buildings in the city, housing and commercial? So, and shouldn't education equip us to at least talk about it? So there I feel that there is a huge mismatch between what we learn and what we end up doing in the profession or in practice, and therefore most architects then are only looking for that extremely small pie, which is your private client bungalow, or a private or government institutional project. Uh, yeah, so uh, that is
I,
another thing that I think we need to look into.
I just had one, like, the when you were
Yeah,
talking about this suggestion that at least we give 1 day a week or 1 hour in a week to really participate with. I think, isn't it better to do this thing right at the student level, or introduce these programs at a college level, so you somehow train the students in that way, that this is a kind of a,
hmm,
I should not say it a mandate, but this is a kind of a routine which you will have to go through with, so so that the betterment of the society can happen in certain ways, if you're talking about architecture. Because I don't know how many firms would be ready right now to give their time to even talk with someone downstairs. Why would they go and interact with other people?
yeah. No, in fact, it's like I said, it has to be done at multiple levels. I mean, if you ask me personally, one I think is that our primary education till 12th standard, the whole purpose of that common education that we all go through is that it prepares us to be citizens of the polis, right? That we are aware of the interplay between the oikos, the individual and the city, and what are the dynamics at play, and also hopefully that education instills in us uh, uh, everything from morality and ethics to a sense of taste. Uh, and I suppose that someone far back must have said that, okay, drawing and craft classes are mandatory in primary education because developing an aesthetic sensibility is an important component that everyone in society should have. Right? But unfortunately, drawing classes in most schools, I'm talking of primary schools, has become just a mundane act of drawing. It somewhere from becoming something about developing aesthetic sensibility, and also the ability to observe nature, to be part of nature, and be part of environment, both human nature as well as nature. Uh, that is not there. So that is one step. And I would completely agree with you that it is. I think it would be great if one mandatory course in architectural education is about something which forces you to deal with society at large. Right now, the only uh, uh, avenue where it happens is in this participatory design studios, right? Which also is optional. But I would be all for it that because actually, if you and I keep saying this often, you go to Vijay Char Rasta, catch hold of one person, random person, and ask that person to name 5 architects from anywhere in the world throughout history, they would not be able to name 5 architects. Or ask that person to say, what does an architect do? They will not be able to tell you what an architect does. So I think because all our discussions, all our websites, all our awards, they are all within the profession, right? We always talk to people within the profession, and therefore I think we have a very warped sense of uh, uh, the importance of architect in society today. Um, I mean, I'm uh, uh, in a way sorry to say this in front of students who will be graduating sometime soon. Uh, but I firmly think that we have a very warped sense of our importance in society. I think the only way general society knows about architects is through some Bollywood movies which have painted a very stereotypical image of the architect as a forward-looking uh, uh, affair, having affairs outside marriage and children outside marriage kind of a persona. I mean, uh, that's the only way I think architects people know about architects in society. And you are absolutely right that uh, uh, I mean, as a profession, as a group of people who are involved in this profession, we are not doing anything about it. And we should start with education. Why not? I mean, I don't know how to go about it or right away, but I think it's important. Uh, I think most of the times we even have a difficulty explaining to our parents exactly what we do and why it takes so much time to do what we do. I mean, it's yeah. Okay. Uh, okay. So if there are no other questions, we break for lunch, and our second session I think starts at 2 o'clock. Am I right? Yeah. So so we meet again at 2 o'clock. Thanks for attending and hope to see you. Okay. Bye.